Hey guys, Bound to Divide here with Abletontips, and today I'm going to be taking you through this progressive house loop that I made with the new D Premium Volume 6 sample pack, and this is how it sounds. Okay, so starting at the top with the kick I'm using is this Kick 25 from D Premium, and I didn't do really any processing, just a little bit of scooping out some of the mid-range here, just to get rid of a little bit of the boxiness in the kick. And then we get into the clap. So the clap's made up of two layers. The first one sounds like this, second one like this. And so the purpose of the second clap is to really just add some white noise, some like high end to the first clap. The main clap is giving like the body and the punch. And I didn't really process this at all. This is clap loop 07 from the pack, and it sounds like this. And then we've got the second clap here, which is clap 04. And again, just a little bit of processing on this one, just boosting up that white noise because that's what I mainly wanted from this clap. And then I just shortened the clap, rolled off a tiny bit of the tail. Not that it really makes a difference. But yeah, together they sound great. Right, then we go into the hats, and the first hat is this hat loop here, hat loop 15. Again, no processing on this. It was pretty much just drag and drop and away we go. But I did layer it with another hat because this hat's kind of a bit too short. I wanted a lot of energy in this loop, and if you want a lot of energy in hi-hats, you generally want a longer offbeat hi-hat that has quite a bit of high end. So I found this one, which is super long. You can see I actually shortened it a bit. And it had a bit of a tail over here, and I just got rid of that too. So just shortening it down like this. Other than that, no other processing was done to that. That's hat 016. So I also took out the transient from it because I think it's quite it's got quite a punch to it, and because we've got the other hat providing like the transient, it's just cleaner to get rid of that transient and only really use the tail and the body. So together, sound like that on its own, a bit too tight and short. And then we have the bass. So this is the main rolling bass over here. And how this was achieved was actually using an arpeggiator. Usually I would make a bunch of notes like this in the bass to make this rolling bass. I was being a bit lazy, and there's nothing wrong with doing it this way. It ends up working exactly the same. So I've taken an arpeggiator and set it to a rate of 16 and the gate to 99%. And the gate is just basically telling the arpeggiator how long each note should be. So if I set the gate to 50%, it'll be half the length of a 16th note. And that... it still sounds fine, but I prefer to just take up most of that note, make it almost like fully sustained, or legato, I guess is the right word. And then let's get into the main sound. So the main sound is a really simple sound. It's really just a saw wave going through a filter. So on its own, it sounds like this. The amp envelope has got a bit of decay on it. That's why you're hearing a tiny bit of a pluck in there. But what happens when we enable this filter is it makes it super plucky because I'm using envelope 2 here and modulating the filter frequency. So if you click on filter frequency and you drag this up here, that's when you start getting that pluckiness, as long as your envelope 2 has got this plucky shape. So the shape here, the decay is at 546 milliseconds and the sustain's at 0. And then I'm using the 12 dB PRD filter, which is like the ladder filter from the Moog, and we're using drive of 1.5 dB, so it's got just a little bit of saturation filter drive on it, just coloring the sound a little bit. And then I've set it to mono so that we don't have any notes ever overlapping. Maybe you could do that by accident. I always just like to set my basses to mono, unless for some reason I want two voices playing at the same time. And then that's it for the main sound, and then really I'm just rolling off some high end and boosting the sub. And the reason for rolling off the high end is that this track is so busy with so many other sounds. We've got this pad, we've got this lead, this brass sound, an arp. There's just so much stuff happening in the mid-range that if I opened up this bass, it would just be unnecessarily taking up room in the mix. So that's the reason for that. Then the next thing we've got is this Flourish. It sounds like this. And it goes on for a really, really long time. And that's just adding some sparkle, some ear candy to the track. So the trick here is to have a really quick set of notes playing. So I've set this to 1/32, so on the grid here, 1/32. And then I'm just playing up the scale, but I'm skipping a note every time. So essentially I'm building a big B-7th chord out of this, I guess, an arp. I called it a flourish, but it's more or less I'm just arpeggiating the chord really quickly. So I'm arpeggiating the chord here and then playing it again in a different octave and shifting up the last note from here to here, so it's landing on the B. And then let's get into the sound and the processing of the sound. I'm just going to turn off all of this. So the sound is just a saw wave from operator. So here you can set it to saw and then make sure that the envelope is fully sustained up here like that. And then we hear the sound. It's just a sustained saw wave pretty much. And then we go into a delay. And that's a ping pong delay set to 3 with a dry wet at 56% and the feedback at 72. So it's a super long and very obvious delay. And it's bouncing it all over the place and just making it all pretty and sparkly. Then we have this EQ8 that's rolling off all the mid-range. Because I only really want the high end from this, I don't care about having this mid-range, and it's also just freeing up that mid-range for the main arp and the bass and the lead. And then we have this reverb, which is pushing it more to the back of the mix. It's not a huge reverb, it's a 4-second reverb, but it does kind of soften it and push it to the back a bit. The dry wet's at 55% here, and we're also just rolling off a bit of the high end of the input signal here. And then this OTT is what kind of makes the delay go on for such a long time, because as soon as the signal tries to decay in volume, that OTT is just expanding it and bringing it up in volume. So it just keeps on coming through the mix pretty much until you hear it again. And it just keeps going on and on and on until we get to this one, which is just basically reversing the order of the notes. So we're going down instead of up. And then we've got a sidechain compressor, which is just sidechaining it here to the kick drum. Okay, let me just turn off that delay. There we go. Alright, then we have this pad. And the pad is a really simple sound, so let's just turn off all the processing. The pad is just one oscillator in Wavetable, and it's a saw wave, but the trick with this is really just in the unison. So if I had to set this to no unison, it's really just a straight set of saw waves. If I turn off the filter, it's just plain old vanilla saw waves. But with the unison, we almost get like this subtle tape effect where it's going in and out of pitch ever so slightly, and that creates enough movement for the sound to feel a bit more alive. And even though it's a background element and we don't really hear it, I think it's always good to have a bit of movement in everything. So the unison provides that movement. Then we got this filter here rolling off everything above 1.19 kilohertz. And then we're going into a reverb. And the reverb is huge. It's the 23-second reverb here at 86% dry wet. And we've don't have much high end on it, but it just pushes it right to the back and turns it into more like a soundscape or a atmosphere. And then we're scooping out a bit of the mid-range to clean it up a bit, and some of the high end. And then it goes into our sidechain compressor. So without it, it's really just creating like a harmonic bed for the track to rest on.
Hi, this video is sponsored by us. If you like these tutorials and want to support the channel, check out our website packed with online courses and professional sound packs. If you want to cut years of your learning curve, check the PML Beginner to Advanced Music Production program for Ableton Live. You will know Ableton inside out and learn how to write, produce, mix and master complete tracks. You learn step by step at your own speed, from an empty file to professional production, as if we're sitting side by side in the studio. Thank you for listening, and now let's get back to your tutorial.
Right, so here's the main sound, the main lead. It sounds like this. So you can see here it's made up of 3 layers, and they're all going into this group called lead, and they have an EQ on it, which is kind of taking out the mid-range and just shaping it a bit. Cleaning it up. But let's get into the layers. So the first layer is this main layer, and it sounds like this. So let's just turn off all of the processing, and I'm going to turn that off, and now we can hear we've just got a saw wave. And we add the second oscillator in, which is this FM harmonics, which just gives it a bit of like a metallic texture. And then we're going into this filter, which is set to 24 dB slope, PRD, and we're doing some drive, 7.69 dB drive, and we're making it like into a plucky shape by modulating the filter using envelope 2. So you just drag this up. And you need to set your envelope 2 to this shape, so the decay is at 335 milliseconds and the sustain's at 39%. And the amp envelope has got a bit of a strange shape to it. You can bend these curves by just dragging this node up like this. And I just wanted it to be quite a sustained sound, but still be decaying over time. So the decay here is at 375 milliseconds, sustains at -20. And then that's it for the synth itself. Then we're going into this chorus, and that's just going to spread the sound out, detune it a little bit, and kind of soften it. So the buzziness of the sound becomes a bit warmer, not as sharp and centered. It's a bit wider and spread out. And we're using the amount here at 92% and the rate at 0.38. Okay, then we're rolling off some of that low end, because that is a horrible frequency to deal with in the mix. Close to 100 Hertz, it's going to be fighting with our mid bass and probably even our sub. So I think it's just a good idea to kind of clean that up a bit. Majority of what people are going to be listening to is happening around here anyway, and up here. And then we're going into this delay. So it's set to 2, the dry width's at 42%, and feedback's at 50. And then a reverb. The reverb here, we're taking out some of the low end from the reverb tail. Dry width's at 41%, and then decay is at 2 seconds. Then we're rolling off the low end and the high end. Alright, then we have this noise layer, and the noise layer's purpose of it is to just make the synth a bit brighter and a bit more noisy, a bit more textured. So together, sound fantastic, I think. And this layer on its own sounds like this. It's really detuned and noisy, but it works in the mix. So here we've got 2 oscillators. Let me just turn this off, set that to none. And so the first oscillator is just a saw wave. And then we add in the second layer, which is another saw wave pitched up 12 semitones. It's brightening it up a bit. And then we're going into this filter, which is set to 12 dB clean filter here. And the frequency is at 600 Hertz. And then we are using envelope 2, the shape with the decay of 584 milliseconds and the sustains at 41%. And that's making this plucky shape. You can see here in the matrix we are only modulating the filter here using envelope 2. Okay, then all the magic is happening here with this unison set to noise. So the voices are set to 8 and the amount's at 40%. So it's really high and it's really detuned. Because all the main tonality is coming from the main synth, we don't notice that it's so detuned. It really just adds a nice texture to the main synth. Okay, then we have the basic bells over here. So you can see if you have a look at the MIDI, this is not lining up with what we have, what we can see over here. So it's kind of like the bells are sort of just creating this like flamming feeling with the main lead, or like, I don't want to say polyrhythm, but it's almost, it's like they're lagging a bit behind, but I just like the tonality of it and it just felt good with the groove. Yeah, I just think it sounds great with the bells. So if we have a look at the MIDI here, you can see we're playing 2 notes over here, 2 notes, and then 1 note. So it's doing this do-do-do, but with the bells, it's just playing 1 note on the bottom. And another thing to just mention about the MIDI of this is, I think why this works so nicely, is that we have the top note, essentially the melody of it, landing on the 1.2 and 1.4 of each bar here. And that's the same place where our clap lands. So if you pay attention to the lead in the mix, it's grooving really nicely with the track because it's always landing on the claps. Yeah, and so back to this bell sound, we are just using this preset, which is called Basic Bells. So if you just search Basic Bells, here it is in Ableton. So you just pretty much load it up. I don't think I changed any of the macros, and I didn't even EQ it. It just worked the way it is. Yeah, and then the second half of this drop, I added some harmonies to the MIDI. So above these notes, I just did it by ear and just listened which notes sounded good together, and I found these two fit quite nicely. Yeah, there was no real music theory or anything that I based this on. Here you can see it's pretty obscure, but like here we've got an octave, and here we've got like a minor third that's sitting below the B. It's, yeah, I didn't think about the music theory here. I just listened to it and thought it sounded cool, these notes on top of these ones. Yeah, and so that's the lead. Then we got this noise. It's not the most interesting sound in the world. It's basically just a noise sweep, but I like to make my own noise sweeps because I often find ones in sample packs they have too much like filter sweeping and like pitching in them. They're too EDM-y sounding, for lack of a better word. So I like to make them a bit more subtle. So just to show you how I made this, I use operator and then load up the white noise over here and set the envelope to fully sustained like this. And then I EQ'd out some of the mid-range and around here some of the presence, because we've got a lot of synths sitting over here, a lot of synth harmonics sitting up here, which can get pretty messy with this white noise. So just cleaning this up in that fashion sounded right to me. And then I'm using this utility. The utility here you can see is going down in volume over time, so it gets quieter. I'm just automating the gain. Then the auto pan, you can see the amount of auto panning, and also the rate goes from fast to a little slower, so from 3 Hertz down to 2.4 Hertz. So we get some subtle panning left and right. And then I've got this EQ8, which is doing the sweep. So here I'm automating down from 10 kilohertz down to 870. But what I was talking about with sample packs mostly having too much of a sweep on them, if you boost this Q a lot and the gain, that's the sort of sweeping I'm talking about that I didn't want. And so I just went for something a bit more subtle and scooped out some of the mid-range. And then we have a lot of reverb on it. And that's just pushing it back and putting it into a space. Alright, then we've got this brass sound, which is more just like a bassy stab. Pretty simple sound. So we got 2 oscillators here, and we're using a filter and some unison. So let me just turn that all off, and then you'll hear what the sound is like. So it's pretty quiet, and that's because there's a lot of drive on the filter. So I'm just going to turn on the filter. We're using PRD mode, and then 14 dB of drive. So it's still just pretty much a plain saw wave, but then we add in the second oscillator here, which is an octave higher, so it's giving it a bit more high end on it. And we've also got the sub oscillator enabled. And there's no real point in having the sub oscillator. I think I was probably just experimenting, because you can see here on the chain I actually take out the sub, and that's because we've got that rolling bass in there. So yeah, the EQ is taking out that sub anyway, so there's no real need for it. It's not really adding anything, but that's just, I guess, part of the process. Yeah, so then we are controlling this filter using envelope 2, which is set to 73 here, and then the shape here has got a long decay, 4-second decay, and the sustain's at 54%. Then we got some unison, which is spreading it and detuning it with the amount of 32% and 5 voices. And that's giving it the, I guess, like the classic saw wave brassy stab feeling. Like I said, we're taking out the sub and we're sidechaining it to the kick. And so this kind of fills out the bassy range quite nicely. Alright, then the final element here is this ARP, and this was just a lucky find. I just searched for ARP in Ableton just to see if they had any nice stock ARPs, and I think under here I found this one. And that's just playing like, if you open up here you can see what chord it's playing. Yeah, and the chord, it's playing we've got a minor third here and a fourth and then an octave. And you basically just place the note, the tonic of your scale. So I'm in B minor, so I just put a note at B, and then it should just be in key with the rest of your track. And I did not change any of the settings here. All I did was EQ it, just taking out a little bit of the sub rumble that's happening over here. And then we've got a compressor sidechaining it to the kick. So that adds quite a lot to the track without it. Yeah, it's just filling out the background a bit with some pretty sparkliness, pretty arpiness. So then we've got lastly a little bit of processing on the master. I've got Span on here, but that was just to check some stuff. This is a free plugin. I know it doesn't come with Ableton, but it is free. You can search for Voxenjo Span. This is not doing anything to the signal. I'm just using it to visualize the mix and just checking like RMS and LUFS and stuff. So, I mean, I can delete that and the track will sound the same. Alright, so the only mastering I did to this was just using a soft clipper to push it up to its maximum loudness. So this is similar to using a limiter, except instead of compressing the signal down, we're clipping all of the peaks that go above the signal. I guess teaching this is a bit beyond the scope of this course, but if you wanted to research soft clipping, there's some really good tutorials out there on YouTube, pretty easy to find. But how I do this is we just use the makeup gain and turn on soft clipping on the glue compressor and push it up until you see this light blinking and you can hear the distortion. So there you can hear some pretty hardcore distortion. Then I would go back like probably about 5 dB from that point. And that sounds pretty good. I think it usually ends up sounding a lot better than the stock Ableton limiter anyway. So whenever I'm confined to only using Ableton plugins, I barely ever use that limiter. I'm just using this glue compressor really and soft clipping it. Alright, yeah, so that's it for this loop. I hope you learned a thing or two in this. If you liked the sounds, all of them come from the new Deep Premium Volume 6 pack, which is linked below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next tutorial.